And well, thank you again for sharing with us your vision about the future.
Thank you.
And well, I have prepared a few questions, and the first one is, although you did not mention in detail about it, I know that one of your initiatives during your prime ministership is the Asian century, right? Well, I'd like to hear about it, and you know, I'd like to know what was your intention, and what is your perspective for full Asia and its future.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for that question. And as Prime Minister, I did commission a major policy paper, which we entitled Australia in the Asian Century. And my aim in that policy paper was to try and galvanise community attention around the forces that are reshaping our region of the world, our world entirely, and consequently are reshaping Australia's future. Australians were already very well aware from the resources boom that demand from our region of the world, from China but also beyond China, had provided a huge economic benefit to Australia. Our commodities were in high demand because of the rapid urbanisation that needed to be resourced, and we were able to provide those resources. But I was trying to make transparent to the Australian community that commodities boom was really the first down payment on what could be a series of waves of change for the Australian economy, that we were well positioned to be a preferred supplier for the region's growing middle class. And as we all know, our region of the world will, relatively shortly, become home to the biggest middle class on the planet, greater in number than Europe and North America combined. And what middle class people want, you know, I think is fairly clear. They do want great education services, legal services, health services. They want bespoke tourism experiences. They want to eat clean, green, healthy food. They want access to good quality wines. Australia stands out as a potential provider of all of these things. And already our third greatest export is education, because so many students come to Australia. So I wanted that to be not just a business conversation or a policymaker's conversation, but a community conversation. And even though political circumstances have changed in Australia and the government shifted in 2013, really this perspective around what the change and rise and growth of Asia can mean for Australia is a pretty bipartisan and shared perspective.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you believe next century, I mean 21st century, will be the century for Asia?
I do. If we look at the sources of dynamism and growth in the global economy, I think when we fast forward the clock across this century, and I'm very conscious that being a futurologist, as I said in my speech, can be a fraught business, but if we look across this century, I think we will continue to see Asia's rise, and then we will also see Africa potentially reap a huge demographic dividend. It is Africa that has a growing population, a greater cohort of young people. That could be a huge challenge if development in Africa goes badly, but it could be an enormous benefit to Africa's economy, societies, the nature of its leadership if it goes well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. I also heard that you know, Australia wanted to be a hub of education, right? We heard we heard much about the education in Australia, an advanced system, educational system, particularly in university-wise. Well, that's true. I think education is always most important for our future, and Korea has invested a lot for the development of human resources, and this HR forum is for that purpose, as you mentioned. Well, indeed, as you mentioned, as our education system has been being maintained for last maybe 100 years without any change. So what kind of innovation you expect in education? I mean, well, in these days, the ICT, particularly information and communication technology, has been developed a lot. Do you believe the effect of the relationship with ICT and the education, how do you think about it?
I think when we talk about technology in education, it can be easy to become dazzled by the capability of the devices, whatever device you select. It can be easily, you can become intrigued by what the device can do. And really the challenge in education is not so much the capability of the device, it's the capability of the teacher to use that device in an integrated way in a classroom. And, what are we trying to do? I mean, when I was in schools, I did my education, I'm old enough to have done my education in the late 1960s and into the 1970s. When I was doing my education, the sum total of facts we had available to us, they were either in the teacher's head, or they were in the school library, or we didn't have them. So if you asked a offbeat, unusual question, and the teacher didn't know the answer, and there wasn't a book in the school library that could give you the answer, well, you wouldn't get the answer. And these were the days when it was very unlikely, particularly families like mine, very unlikely that you'd go home and find a full set of encyclopedia or anything like that. Those things were very expensive and not many people had them. Now, of course, you and I could be out to dinner having a conversation and saying, what do you think the per capita gross domestic product of Malawi is? And instantaneously, we could get the answer. So the whole education task has changed from fact transmission. Do you know that? Can you get a child to memorise it? That's no longer the task. The task is really, how do you get children to use all of the potential of new technology to get accurate information, to mobilise it in a way that it is effective for learning, and to show the communication, creativity, spontaneity, teamwork, interpersonal skills that employers will want to see. I suspect if you and I, perhaps not the GDP of Malawi, but if you and I Googled something like the science of climate change, we'd get all sorts of answers displayed, some of which would be right and some of which would be very wrong. And so the discernment for the information sources is going to be pivotal, and I think that's going to get harder, not easier. So I think a challenge for all of our societies is how do we get that right in our learning models in schools and beyond. And I spoke a great deal about schooling today, but of course the education challenge extends to how do we enable adults to come in and out of education continuously. The old model, which I was subject to, I went to university and studied law and arts and majoring in economics, and the vision was you spent 6 years at university, you got poured into your head enough to last you for the next 40 or 50, job done, you're let loose in the world, go be a lawyer, go be an economist, you've got enough in your head to do that. Now, of course, that can't be the model for university education today or technical education today. Students will have to go in and out of education, short courses, refresher courses, online courses. How do we integrate this with the world of work? How how do we make it possible for people to continually update their skills? That's the big challenge in front of us. In Australia, of course, we're thinking about these things. We're very proud of our education system. We've got a good schooling system by the standards of the world, but we don't get it right for every child. We most particularly don't get it right for our Indigenous children, our First Peoples children, who still suffer a lot of disadvantage. We've got a very good technical and further education system, but as the world of work changes, it will need to keep modernising. And we have very good universities and overall a very good university system, but like every other university on the planet, our universities were designed as physical places. You know, they had a monopoly on geography. If you grew up, as I did, in Adelaide in South Australia, you'd go to Adelaide University or you'd go to Flinders University. They were the two choices. They had a monopoly on geography. It was hard for, you know, average income people to send their children off even to Melbourne or Sydney to study, let alone off to Korea or America or anywhere else. Now that monopoly on geography has given way because new technology means I could be living in Adelaide, Australia and studying at almost a university in almost any country in the world. So what does that mean about our long-term university model? So these are all big questions where we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater because we are doing a lot of things right, and Korea particularly is doing a lot of things right. But that doesn't mean we can shirk some of these big questions.
Thank you. So, you know, as a president of a university in Korea, I emphasize the importance of MOOC, massive open online courses. So, you may agree with me, right? Thank you. Another important point for our prosperous future is, of course, economic growth or economic stability, whatever. But the important and the serious issue we have in Korea, maybe in all the world, is that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. The gap between two is getting bigger and bigger. I believe you have already confronted this problem as a prime minister, and what kind of recommendations you can give for us to solve that problem?
Okay, that's a nice, easy question. I think you know, one of the statistics we've got to remember is that actually our world has been doing a pretty good job in bringing people out of extreme poverty. Actually, the numbers of people in our world today who live in extreme poverty has been profoundly reduced. And if we continue the journey focused on the Sustainable Development Goals, which are one of the very big legacies of Ban Ki-moon's time as UN Secretary General, then it's conceivable we will end extreme poverty. So we are making a difference. But you are right, the gap is a widening gap, even as the bottom is coming up. The gap is a widening gap. And when you look at the factors driving that, there's now huge economic returns for people who have assets. So if you have a level of wealth and you properly invest and deploy that level of wealth, you can, you know, keep cycling up. And some of the, you know, people who've made the most money in the world have shown how that can be done. We've got the sort of blockbuster company phenomenon. Of course, Samsung is one of them, but the blockbuster company phenomenon that, you know, can create very, very quickly many wealthy people. You know, I'm thinking obviously of your Bill Gateses and your Mark Zuckerbergs and people like that, people who become extremely wealthy very fast. And the structures of our nation states, as we think about taxation programs, transfer programs, social safety nets, has not kept pace with these sorts of economic developments. So it is more easy for capital to be mobile and to avoid taxation in any regime. We haven't, in many countries, thought carefully enough about taxation regimes on asset classes as opposed to income taxation. And our social safety nets have not necessarily been as robust as they should be in the face of complex problems. I think all of this is a domestic challenge, but it's a shared challenge in the sense that some of the international regulatory structures, particularly on tax and stability factors like banking, matter, and learning from each other's experience matters. I think we don't do enough public policy comparison within our region and learn from each other. And so politicians come into office and, everybody sets about reinventing the wheel. I want to do something really big in education, or I want to do something really important for people with disabilities, or, I want to do something really important for families that are stranded on welfare and have been for many generations. And we get about that task, but we don't look laterally enough at the experience of others, which is why forums like this are just so important to sharing that kind of knowledge.
Anyway, that's a great problem everywhere. Yeah?
It is.
Yeah, right. Well, you mentioned during your talk several times that, in near future, many jobs will disappear due to artificial intelligence, IoT, and robotics, etc. And in Korea, we call it fourth industrial revolution. I heard that, Your Excellency, you were quite successful in job creation during your prime ministership. So what was the basic strategy in job creation, and how do you consider, or what's your thought about the future job market?
I think there are some things that Australia can say it's done well, and it's done well over time. So whilst I would say my government, the government I led, did these things, they've been done by other governments. I think we are quite good at structural adjustment, at looking at economic shocks that have got particular locational effects, and actually tailoring packages to try and make sure that that isn't a catastrophe for that region. To give some examples of that, Australia has had to think about what to do with car manufacturing workforces and communities that for generation after generation have been reliant on the big car plant for jobs. And those car plants are gone. And that kind of structural adjustment, what can we do to help people find a new opportunity? What can we do to renew communities affected by that kind of economic blow? I think we've been relatively good at that. And whilst it's not perfect, we do have, by the standards of the world, pretty good social safety nets and pretty good education access and opportunities. Many more things that we would like to do, but by the standards of the world, we do a number of those things quite well. But I wouldn't sit here and pretend to you that we have the model that is going to cope with the estimates like 70 to 80% of today's jobs being lost. I travel very widely and I've met people who have got, an insight on bits of that challenge. I've met people who have got different views about the time range over which that challenge is going to play out and the sort of adjustment factors that will come into play as it plays out. But I haven't met anybody who's got the answer. So there's still a lot of puzzling through to do to work out how we're going to accommodate in meaningful work with the kind of income streams that can sustain individuals and enable family life, how we are going to do that in our societies. And we've all got more thinking to do there, and I know some of that thinking is going to happen today here at this forum. But it's a very challenging set of, exciting, plenty of upside, but also a very profound set of challenges for the future.
Okay, we have less than 5 minutes, so maybe it's a final ask. We have a lot of young students among audience. So, could you share your few words of wisdom with the young generation, young students gathered here, how they can develop their potential?
Well, it is good to see some young people here, so thank you for being here today and thinking about some of these big picture questions. For me, as I look back on my life, and I'm not done yet, I've still got many things I would like to do, but as I look back on my life to date, a few things stand out for me. One is that it's really important to define your own personal sense of purpose, what your kind of life mission is, what you want your life to be about. Either you're the, navigator of your life's journey, or forces beyond your control will just buffet you around and push you wherever. And so to be a thoughtful navigator of your life's journey, you really want to think deeply about what it is that you want to achieve. For me, as long ago as my university days, I was very determined that I wanted to make a difference on the politics of opportunity, on education, on ensuring that everybody got a fair go. And it was that became the foundation stone of my political career. So thinking about that. Second, I would say nurturing a sense of who you are. This can be a very unkind age. Politics has perhaps always been a very unkind pursuit, and we've always been prone to say quite nasty things about politicians. But today, whether you're in public life or not, you can see some of the most dreadful things said about you on social media. There would be school children and university children in Korea who will look down during the course of today at social media and see something very sharp and very critical said about them. And you can't let all of that so weigh on your shoulders that it prevents you living your life. And so I think having a sense of who you truly are, and having a sense of what is constructive criticism versus what is kind of ugly sniping, that really matters. And I think finally, and this has been very important for me, I think across all of human history, we've all faced the dilemma of, the urgent versus the important. All of you probably faced that dilemma in coming to today's forum. Many of you are sitting here thinking, well, I'm glad I'm here, but I know the work is piling up on my desk back at the office. But you've made a choice to come and do something important rather than do the things that are perhaps urgent, that are piling up in your inbox. That's always been a historic dilemma. Do I spend my time doing one or the other? Now the urgent is so privileged for our attention. It, buzzes and beeps at us 24 hours a day. You can go home exhausted at the end of a huge long day and all you've done is cleared your emails. You haven't done any thinking about, where you're going to be or where the world's going to be in 5 or 10 years' time. So carving out some dedicated time to some quiet time, some unplugged time, to think about the world and think about the future really matters. And when I say that to young people, unplugged time, they look at me like I want them to, you know, chop an arm off. You mean turn the phone off? You mean, you know, put these devices aside for a while? And I do mean that, because I don't think we can do the deepest of thinking if every 10 seconds we're looking down and checking the next thing. So that discipline to carve out that time is really important too.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Really, we really kept time. Yeah. Well, we really appreciate your interesting talk and your valuable suggestions for us and for all Asia and for all the world. And again, I really thank you for your participation.
Thank you.
Okay, it's time, so let us conclude the first session. And please, would you join me for applauding her?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.